I remember the awful times. I stayed in the house because of the ongoing troubles. My mother didn't want me out as it was very dangerous. It was here in Strabane at that time. Eamon McDevitt was always up to mischief. He used to hang around with David Barr. In fact, David taught him sign language, if I remember rightly. What had happened was, one day he was out on the street and he picked something up from the ground and he was waving it around and he got shot in the neck. The Troubles conflict was between religions, Catholics and Protestants. The only effect it had on me was, for example, if I was out for a drink with hearing friends and the door opened, everyone immediately looked around in fear to see who was there in case it might be a gunman. Vigilance was heightened then, but life carried on. Deaf people were not really involved with the Troubles. Mostly people stayed in their own family bubble to keep themselves safe. Back then there wasn't large gatherings within the deaf community for that reason. My primary school was on the Falls Road, Belfast, which was a flashpoint for trouble. I think it was about 1980-81 during the hunger strike. I remember going to school on the bus, and I'll never forget the bus weaving through fires and barricades and riots, and I remember seeing a man standing with a balaclava on, and I innocently was merrily waving to him. He was armed. The bus staff told me to stop, but I hadn't a clue what the whole thing meant. I was so excited seeing this action man, I didn't know it was IRA. One time in school, while watching TV, the TV was on a movable stand. And all of a sudden it started to shudder. A bomb had exploded and I hadn't understood why the TV started to shudder. Then the teacher told us we could go home. I was so excited to be getting out of school early. From memory, it was a huge bomb, 5,000 pounds of explosives, and it was outside Andersonstown police station. That TV shuddering is something I'll never forget. Do you remember the time of the Troubles here? Yes, it was awful. Words couldn't describe it. What was it like? Terrible. I remember going back on Sunday and then being sent home because of the unrest over the hunger strikes. I can't remember exactly when, but I was wondering what was going on. I could obviously see people marching, but couldn't make any sense of it then. I found out later they were protesting over Bloody Sunday and the hunger strikes. And over time I came to learn more about it all. It was shocking, really. I remember the fateful day in 1972. It was Bloody Sunday. I was out walking. It was a lovely day, but bitter cold. I was along with my friends Harry and Noel, and we could see all the people marching peacefully along the route they had planned. When we reached the bog side, Noel left us. Up ahead there was a barricade where the soldiers and the police were waiting. At that time they used rubber bullets and water cannons to disperse crowds, and in the water there was dye they used to mark the skin, and that helped them catch anyone involved with protests or riots. Shots were fired and we were obviously very unnerved. We retreated into the bottom of the flats behind pillars. Then I saw a man hit the ground. He started to roll and lay there face down for about 5 minutes. People soon came around him. He had been shot in the back. I saw another shooting that day. Another man got shot from behind. It was hard to believe this was really happening. Oh my God, we were so lucky to get out unscathed when you think of the horror of what happened. Young men getting gunned down. It was sickening. I was in total shock. That's terrible. Even after a year and beyond, I suffered flashbacks from what I witnessed that day. Thankfully, over time, it has lessened. I remember back in Belfast, my mother always used to tell me to be careful. I always played it down and acted cool, even though I had anxiety about the troubles at that time. One night I was at the Deaf Club. It was around about 11, and I left and was walking home. The club was about 15 minutes away from where I lived. There seemed to be commotion going on around, but we were signing away and decided to stop for fish and chips. It wasn't the best time of the night to be eating, but anyway, we continued on, and then my friend went his way, and I continued to the Grosvenor Road. It was near the Royal Victoria Hospital, and there were armed officers, and they tried to communicate with me. I tried to say I was deaf. They seemed suspicious. So I took out a pen and paper and wrote to them I was deaf and returning from the Deaf Club. They wanted to know where it was, and I pointed. Then they told me to carry on, and all I could think about was my mother was right to advise me about the danger. It was scary. Another time I was going to work in Lisburn by bus. I worked with yarn there, and after my shift I caught the bus back to Belfast. It was late, about 11 p.m. I was on the 3 to 11 shift. I was walking along with a shoulder bag that had a change of clothes in it, when I noticed soldiers lined up on the road. I walked past them, watching them out the side of my eye. I didn't expect anything to happen, when suddenly I was pushed against the wall. I eventually got through to them that I was deaf, and I could see one soldier waving his arms, making the cancel gesture to another soldier that was on his knees with the rifle pointed at me. He continued gesturing and signalled I was deaf. He wrote that he was sorry, and I obviously remained polite, but I was petrified. Then he wanted to know what was in the bag, and I said it was my work clothing, but there had been a knot that was sticking through the bag that looked like a gun. He questioned me and I explained my work, etc., so he let me go. When I got home, my mother was worried, and she told me, "You need to tell the boss it's not safe walking at night, that a taxi would be safer." Another night, roughly the same time, I was walking home and there was a line of soldiers, and I was passing when they grabbed me. There seemed to be something going on the roof. They shone a bright light in my face and wanted to know the reason I was out late with a bag. It was the same story over again. Me explaining that I was deaf, I was coming from work, and luckily they let me go. My mother wasn't happy and stressed I needed to report this to the boss. At work I broached it with him and he was sympathetic. There was another deaf man there. He was from the other side of town, the Shankill. He used BSL and I used ISL. He was friends with Bobby Bailey. We were to share a taxi, and there was a bit of contention about us living on opposite sides of the political spectrum, the Shankill and the Grosvenor, but I knew a short way, and the plan was for me to get dropped off first. We'd been doing this for a while when one night there was two men sitting, and my friend said to me, "Watch out." Really, it was a plan to trick me, but I didn't know. He said they're probably armed with knives. Like, what could you do with a knife? Exactly. I remember the security forces always picking on me because I had red hair. Me and my wife were in the car one day when there was a roadblock. They told me to get out, and my wife lost her temper. I tried to calm her down, but it was too late. We were both ordered out of the car and searched. Oh, and that reminds me, I must tell you about another time. There was me, Noel, and Harry. And Noel had been learning to drive and had just passed the test, with Harry sitting in with him. We landed in Bundoran in a run, and on the way back, didn't the car break down? We had no option but to leave it where it was, because we didn't know what was wrong with it. We agreed to catch the bus, and when we were on the bus, this young man got on. He looked wild, to be honest with you. We never took him on, and then the bus stopped at the border, and a soldier got on board, looked around, and got off. A bit further we were stopped again, and another soldier got on, and he signalled to me to come forward. I couldn't understand why he wanted me, so I went forward, got off the bus, and the bus drove off. Everything was running through my mind. As he was looking through some photographs in a book, he kept looking at them and at me. And what had happened was, it turned out I looked very similar to a person of interest. Once he was sure it wasn't me, he said I could go, but I had no way home. So I said I would have to thumb a lift. Next, this fancy Jaguar pulled up, and I got in and got back in style. But there were many occasions they got me mixed up with their list of terrorists. Yes, that happened. The famous red hair. Did anything like that ever happen you? No, it never did happen me. I'm a quiet person by nature. I had just turned 18 and passed my driving test. Now, the police thrived on harassment. There were always those checkpoints when they asked to see your licence and inquire where you were going, etc. So I had just left one checkpoint and went around the corner, and there was another one. I was so fed up. And then soldiers appeared, and one pointed the gun into my car. I tried to say I was deaf. They wanted to know where I was going, and I said I was going to visit a friend, but wouldn't say any more. Tension soon arose between us, and the soldier, while pointing the gun at me, threatened me. At that time I supported the Republican movement, and I was waiting to meet a friend when the army appeared and formed a line. I had no idea what they were doing, so I moved away. When one signalled to me, he had eyes on me and could shoot me in the head. I moved further away from where I was supposed to meet my friend, and when he eventually found me, I had to explain to him what had happened. It was awful times with all the security forces everywhere. Then in 1968 the trouble started. Do you remember? Yes, I remember walking to work back then. It was very scary, especially with the body searches. I was always relieved to get them over and done with. Yes, I remember those times. There are two occasions that stick out for me. The first was when I was about 6 months pregnant. Myself and my mum were buying sugar, when suddenly the floor moved beneath us. A bomb had exploded without warning. The warning had been given, but the police didn't act on it. The other one was when my husband was in Long Kesh prison. Whenever you went to visit, the search regime was extreme. They even opened babies' nappies to check inside them. To be honest, they communicated with me okay. It was exhausting travelling all the way to visit for 15 years. Did you have to go by bus every day? Yes, I remember going twice a week. Luckily we had PDF, which was Prisoner Dependence Fund, for expenses like your food and bus fares. I had heard about trouble in Derry. My mother and father didn't allow me to go there, as I was deaf, and the fact that I had never been and did not know the area. So they worried about that, and they kept me away from it. We had a big family, and I was the only deaf member of the family. Yes, I had a good family, and being honest, I was spoiled. I have lovely memories of growing up. When I came home from school during the holidays, I remember my sisters telling me about the bombs and everything. But I hadn't a clue about the troubles because I was at boarding school in Dublin all the time. They were talking about the hype in Derry and Belfast and the shootings, etc. But I really didn't have a clue what they were talking about. It was all very scary. When I left school, the army were installed everywhere. It made no sense to me, and to this day, I only know some of what happened during the Troubles. I remember hearing people mocking me because I was deaf. There was always trouble on the Falls Road. But where I lived was very peaceful. Nothing was going to stop me walking along the falls though. I had no reservation about that, but I can recall the army stopping me. I signed in an over-the-top, exaggerated way, "I am deaf." One was checking back with another about me, and he affirmed that I was deaf and I could go. The reason they knew this was because the army used the deaf club sometimes. I was shocked when I realised this, but the club did let them use the building to raise a bit of money. And that's how they recognised me. What can I say? I was never involved with the Troubles. I remained neutral and kept myself to myself. I remained within my family and friends, and we never experienced any problems. Oh, the Troubles were harrowing times, and people suffered. We deaf people didn't get access to what was going on back then, especially as there weren't any interpreters. We didn't understand what it was all about at all. We were starved of the information.